Some gifts, errant acts of kindness. Their confessions in disguise. Ethan stood in the empty living room, the sound of his footsteps echoing off walls once filled with laughter. He let her keep the house. Yes, every brick, every painted memory. But beneath its floorboards lay something he hadn't dared to face for years. Have you ever given away something so important that it felt like tearing away a part of your soul? And worse, what you gave carried the very truth you'd been hiding. Mara had always loved this place, with its creaking staircase and rain-scented garden, but Ethan couldn't stay. The walls had learned too much. The silence had seen too deep. He signed the papers with trembling hands, pretending the basement didn't exist. The secret wasn't about money or betrayal. It was about love that had drowned in guilt. Outside, the sky bruised with evening. Inside, the house waited, holding its breath, knowing the truth would one day rise through the cracks. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Mara walked through the house like a stranger visiting her own memories. The echo of Ethan's departure still haunted the air. She had won, hadn't she? The house was hers now. The garden, the creaking steps, the dreams they'd whispered into the walls. But something beneath the floor kept whispering back. The nights grew heavier. The basement door seemed to breathe. Ethan tried not to look back as he drove away. The windshield blurred with rain, and the wipers could barely keep up. He told himself he was free, that letting her keep the house was mercy. But something inside him rattled. A memory, a lie, or maybe both. He whispered to the empty seat beside him, as though she could still hear, "Don't go downstairs." That night, Mara dreamed of water. Cold, endless, rising beneath the house. She woke to the faint sound of dripping below. The basement door was ajar again. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something sweet. She told herself it was nothing, but her heart refused to believe her. Ethan's phone buzzed at midnight. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Silence. Then a woman's breath. Soft, trembling. Ethan. It was Mara's voice, but colder. Why is there another room down there? The house had gone quiet again, but silence here wasn't peace. It was pressure. Every night, the creak above the basement seemed to move closer to Mara's bedroom. She had begun leaving the lights on, the way people do when they fear something that isn't supposed to exist. Ethan's warning echoed in her mind like a breath she couldn't release. What if he hadn't been protecting her? What if he'd been protecting himself? That thought alone kept her from sleep. At dawn, she stood by the basement door again, her hand trembling against the cold brass knob. A faint hum vibrated through it, almost like a heartbeat waiting to be found. Miles away, Ethan parked outside an old cafe, his phone pressed against his forehead. He had ignored 3 more calls from Mara. Every ring felt like the sound of guilt clawing through his ribs. He wanted to tell her the truth. How years ago, during the worst of their marriage, something terrible had happened in that basement. But how could he explain what had buried there without losing what little of himself remained? Mara finally descended the stairs. Each step protested beneath her feet. Each breath grew colder. The air thickened halfway down, as if the walls were exhaling after years of silence. She swept her flashlight across the cement floor. Boxes, broken shelves, paint cans, and then she saw it. A door she had never noticed before. Smaller, lower, as though the house itself had tried to forget it existed. Ethan couldn't sit still. He drove back toward the house through a storm that had returned without warning. His thoughts tangled between fear and regret. He remembered the night, the shouting, the crash, the silence that followed. He remembered the secret he sealed beneath that floor. He whispered into the rain, "Please, Mara, don't open it." The small door groaned as Mara pulled. The hinges screamed, dust falling like ash. A rush of cold air met her face, sharp and sour, Behind it lay a narrow tunnel, its walls carved roughly through concrete, leading into blackness. She raised the flashlight higher, heart pounding. At the far end, something glimmered. Metal, perhaps, or glass. Her breath trembled out in a whisper. "Ethan, what did you do?" The tunnel breathed like something alive. Mara's flashlight shook as she stepped inside, the beam cutting through thick air that smelled of rust and damp earth. Her bare feet pressed against cold concrete, every sound swallowed by the dark. The deeper she moved, the more the walls seemed to close in, like the house itself was guiding her somewhere. It didn't want her to go. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She told herself Ethan was just a man, not a monster. But the whisper that followed her down the tunnel didn't sound human at all. Upstairs, the house began to react. The kitchen light flickered on its own. Picture frames tilted. The air thickened with static. Outside, wind howled through the gutters like something trying to speak. The moment Mara found the metal object buried in the dirt, every bulb in the house burst at once. It wasn't a piece of glass. It wasn't a piece of glass. It was a box. Small, locked, and old enough to carry another lifetime inside. Ethan reached the old street. The house loomed at the end of the road, its windows faintly lit even through the storm. He could see her silhouette moving behind the curtain. He slammed the door of his truck and ran. The rain drenched him within seconds, but he didn't stop. He had buried that box for a reason, because no one was supposed to know what it contained, not even Mara. Mara dragged the box upstairs, her hands blackened with soil. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it resisted being lifted. She placed it on the living room floor and stared. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the tarnished lid. The lock was rusted shut, but the keyhole was clean, too clean. Someone had opened it before. Her hands shook as she reached for the letter opener. The moment the tip touched the lock, the basement light flickered back on. Ethan burst through the front door, breathless, dripping with rain. "Mara, don't open it!" he shouted, but she already had. The lid groaned, then snapped free. Inside lay a stack of photographs, brittle with age, pictures of their family, their old vacations, and one final image that froze her heart. Ethan standing in the basement, holding the same box behind a woman she didn't recognize. The sound that left Mara wasn't a scream. It was a heartbreak made audible. The storm pressed hard against the walls, thunder rolling like distant judgment. Mara sat frozen on the floor, her eyes fixed on the photograph that didn't belong. The woman in the image stood beside Ethan, her smile soft and tired, her hand resting protectively on a small child's shoulder. The same basement stretched behind them, only cleaner, newer. "Who is she?" Mara whispered, her voice breaking through the static of rain. Ethan didn't answer. His silence was confession enough. "She was my sister," Ethan said finally. The words came slow, dragged through years of silence. "Before you. Before any of this." Mara's breath caught. He told her about a night when the house was still being built, when his sister Emily had come to help him paint the basement. A loose beam, a fall, a silence that had never ended. He had buried the truth there, sealing his guilt beneath the concrete, beneath their marriage, beneath the gift he'd left her. Mara stared at the photograph again. The woman's face was gentle, familiar in a way that hurt. "You built our life on top of her grave," she said softly. Ethan looked at her, unable to speak. The weight of truth collapsed the distance between them, but not the pain. Love had always been their foundation, and now so was guilt. She stood and stepped closer to him, eyes full of sorrow rather than rage. "Why didn't you tell me?" Outside, the storm began to quiet. The world exhaled, as if the truth itself had changed the air. Ethan walked to the window, shoulders sagging. "I let you keep the house," he said quietly. because it wasn't mine anymore, it was hers. Mara turned toward the open box again. Inside, beneath the photos, lay a small brass key, its surface polished by time. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she realized what the basement had been hiding wasn't just memory. It was something unfinished. Ethan followed Mara down into the basement. Together, they stood before the smaller door, now wide open. The air had shifted, less heavy, almost tender. Mara held up the brass key, feeling its warmth against her palm. "You buried her, but she never left," she said gently. Ethan nodded, tears finally falling. "Then let's finish what we started." They walked deeper into the tunnel, the light trembling between them like forgiveness learning to breathe. The tunnel seemed different this time. It no longer felt like a place of punishment. It felt like memory itself, alive and waiting. Mara and Ethan moved slowly, their joined lights slicing through the dark. The air hummed with something sacred, something that asked to be seen but not feared. At the end of the passage, they found a wooden chest buried halfway in the dirt. The brass key trembled in Mara's hand as if it remembered where it belonged. When she turned it, the sound of the lock opening echoed like a sigh that had waited years to be released. Inside the chest were papers, letters, drawings, fragments of a life Ethan had tried to erase but couldn't. Emily's handwriting curved across the pages, tender and forgiving. There were photographs of Ethan as a boy, smiling beside her under sunlight, their hands stained with paint from the same color that still covered the basement walls. Mara felt tears fall before she could stop them. The secret wasn't just guilt. It was grief that had nowhere left to go. "I never meant to hide her from you," Ethan said, voice breaking in the stillness. "I just couldn't forgive myself." Mara placed her hand over his. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," she whispered. "It's something you finally stop running from." In the silence that followed, the walls no longer seemed to breathe. They simply listened. They gathered Emily's letters and carried them upstairs. Rain had stopped. The air felt lighter. Mara opened every window, letting the wind move through the rooms, sweeping away years of silence. The house, once heavy with secrets, seemed to breathe again. Ethan watched her from the hallway. "She would have liked you," he said softly. Mara smiled, not out of joy, but understanding. Then she never really left. They buried the chest beneath the oak tree in the garden, the same place Emily had planted with Ethan when they were children. No words were needed. The earth accepted the box gently, the way one accepts peace after years of resistance. When it was done, Mara slipped her hand into Ethan's. For the first time, neither of them looked back toward the house. It could keep its memories. They had made peace with the past that lived beneath it. Days passed quietly after the burial. The air inside the house felt lighter, as though something invisible had been lifted. Yet silence has its own kind of gravity. It pulls you back toward what's unfinished. Mara stood by the kitchen window one morning, staring at the old oak tree. Clouds gathered again over the horizon. She wondered if peace was meant to last, or if healing always came with a shadow. Behind her, Ethan brewed coffee in silence. The smell of rain drifted in before the first drop touched the glass. They spent the day cleaning the house together. Dust came off in clouds that shimmered in sunlight. Broken things were quietly repaired. For every crack they filled, another memory surfaced. Laughter, arguments, promises half kept. They didn't speak of the past anymore, but it lingered like a song they both knew by heart. When thunder rolled again in the evening, neither of them flinched. That night, the rain came harder. Lightning cracked the sky, and the wind moaned through the chimney. Mara sat awake, listening, not with fear, but with memory. Downstairs, she thought she heard footsteps, soft and rhythmic. She rose, walked to the basement door, and paused. When she opened it, the air was still, but the faint smell of paint drifted upward. And for just one heartbeat, she swore she saw a figure at the bottom of the stairs. A woman's outline, smiling. The next morning, sunlight poured through every window. Ethan woke to find Mara painting the kitchen wall, a shade of soft, pale blue. "Her color," she said simply when he entered. He smiled faintly, picking up a brush beside her. They painted in silence, two souls remaking something broken with gentleness instead of fear. Sometimes love doesn't survive endings. It grows into something quieter, something true. That night, the rain returned. But it was gentle this time, rhythmic and kind. Mara lay in bed listening to it, her eyes tracing the ceiling. Ethan slept beside her, finally at peace. The storm outside no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like forgiveness coming home. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, the echo that once haunted them had quieted at last. Spring came gently. The house no longer groaned under the weight of its secrets. Instead, it seemed to hum quietly with life. Flowers returned to the garden. The oak tree shimmered with new leaves, and sunlight touched every forgotten corner. Ethan sat on the porch, reading one of Emily's old letters aloud, not as an apology, but as remembrance. Mara listened from the doorway. She didn't interrupt. Some love stories don't end. They just learn how to breathe differently. Inside, the walls were painted anew. The old cracks had been sealed, but not erased. Their faint lines remained like veins in stone, reminders of everything the house had survived. Mara ran her fingers along one of them and smiled. The house wasn't perfect anymore, but neither were they. And maybe that was what made it beautiful now. Ethan placed a new photo on the mantel. It was simple, just him and Mara standing beneath the oak tree, smiling without pretending. The photograph caught more than light. It caught peace. The old one, the faded image of him and Emily, rested quietly behind it. Not hidden, just layered beneath time, part of the same story. That evening, they shared dinner by candlelight, rain starting again outside. But this time, it was a rain that comforted instead of warned. They laughed easily, spoke softly, and every word felt lighter than the last. The house creaked and settled around them, not as a reminder of ghosts, but as if it too was finally at rest. Later, when the lights dimmed and only the sound of rain remained, Mara whispered, "Do you think she forgave you?" Ethan smiled faintly, eyes on the ceiling. "I think she forgave us both." The camera pulls back slowly, through the hall, past the staircase, over the quiet basement door now closed for good. Outside, the oak tree swayed gently in the rain, roots deep, branches open. The house, once broken, now stood as witness to something rare, love that had learned how to heal.